Welcome to the deep dive. You've put together a fascinating stack of sources for us today. Articles, research notes, reports, all converging on a single, incredibly compelling figure in South Korean politics, Lee Jae-myung.
That's right. We've sifted through material covering his journey from, well, extremely challenging early beginnings through his impactful time as a human rights lawyer, then ascending through local and provincial government roles as mayor and governor,
Right.
right up to his current position as the central figure of the opposition party and navigating a barrage of significant legal challenges.
And our mission today is really to unpack all of this for you. We want to cut through the complexity, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from these sources, and help you understand who Lee Jae-myung is, where his drive comes from, and critically, what makes his story so profoundly relevant to the political landscape in South Korea right now.
Exactly. We'll explore the policies he championed, the political battles that defined his rise, and the, consistent thread of controversies and legal issues that have shadowed his career. Think of this as your essential shortcut to being well-informed on this dynamic and often tumultuous political life.
Okay, let's unpack this stack and dive in. So, according to these sources, Lee Jae-myung's story really begins in a place of significant hardship. Can you paint a bit more of a picture of his early life based on what we have here?
Yeah, the reports are quite stark about his origins. Born in 1964 in a small farming village, his family faced intense poverty. They describe his mother taking on various difficult jobs, including cleaning public toilets, just to make ends meet.
Wow.
And his father's struggles with gambling debts, even abandoning the family for a time.
It sounds like a profoundly difficult environment, and this financial pressure directly impacted his schooling, didn't it?
It absolutely did. Hoping for better opportunities, the family moved to a shantytown area in Singnam, a satellite city south of Seoul. But the need to contribute financially meant he had to drop out after only finishing elementary school.
Just elementary.
While still a young teenager, to work in local factories.
That's a world away from a traditional education path. And that period in the factory sounds particularly brutal, even leading to a permanent injury.
Unfortunately, yes. One of the sources recounts a severe accident with a press machine that resulted in a permanent disability in his left arm. A lasting physical reminder, that challenging time.
Despite all that, the sources repeatedly highlight his incredible determination to learn, even outside the classroom.
This is where we see the resilience that seems to, define his trajectory. He studied tirelessly on his own, eventually passing a high school equivalency exam in 1980.
The GED equivalent.
Right. He himself reportedly called that day the best day of my life. That success propelled him forward, allowing him to excel on college entrance exams and earn a scholarship to study law at Chungang University in Seoul in 1982.
So, a remarkable leap from the factory floor with a disability to a prestigious university studying law. And he formally became a lawyer after passing the National Bar exam in 1986, following his mandatory military service.
Okay, so once he had that law degree and passed the bar, it seems he quickly channeled his experiences into advocacy, particularly in the Swangnam community where he grew up.
He did. From the late 1980s onwards, he became deeply involved in pro bono work, volunteering with the YMCA in Sonyam. He provided free legal counsel to laborers, victims of domestic violence, and other disadvantaged individuals.
Right.
Coming from that working-class background, the sources really emphasize his particular focus on championing the rights of factory workers and the urban poor. The material refers to him as the first self-described human rights attorney in Sonyam, actively fighting perceived injustices. There's an early case mentioned that seems characteristic of this drive defending a labor activist.
Yes, one notable instance was his pro bono defense of Hwang Changhwa, a labor activist arrested for organizing workers. While Hwang was ultimately convicted, the sources note that Lee's advocacy was successful in reducing the prison sentence on appeal. It sort of demonstrated his willingness to stand up for organized labor early on.
His strong anti-corruption stance also seems to have emerged quite early, even putting him in personal legal jeopardy, which kind of foreshadows some later challenges, doesn't it?
It certainly did. In 2002, he took a bold and, rather unconventional step to expose alleged bribery involving Sanyam's then mayor. He reportedly impersonated a prosecutor during an investigation.
He impersonated a prosecutor.
Yeah, to obtain a Tage confession related to illicit land development bribes. While this action did expose the mayor's wrongdoing, it resulted in Lee himself being convicted and fined 1.5 million won for impersonating a public official.
And that wasn't the only time his activism led to fines, right?
Right. In 2003, he organized a petition drive gathering over 18,000 signatures, demanding a public hospital in Seongnam after local facilities closed. When the city council shelved the plan, activists occupied the council chamber. Lee was accused of leading that protest,
Oh.
resulting in a 5 million won fine for obstruction of public duties.
These early incidents paint a picture of someone willing to push boundaries and challenge authority aggressively to achieve reforms, but as you highlight, this approach also led to multiple legal charges against him relatively early in his career.
Yeah, and by the mid-2000s, after years of intense civic activism and facing several prosecutions related to it, the sources indicate he felt a turning point. He reportedly decided it was time to embrace public voices in a more formal way, seeking elected office to effect change from within the system.
His first attempts at getting elected weren't immediately successful, though.
No, they weren't. He joined the liberal Yuri Party in 2005. He ran for Seongnam mayor in 2006 and lost, and then for a National Assembly seat in 2008, also without success. But his persistence eventually paid off.
And in 2010, he finally secured that first electoral victory.
Yes, he was elected mayor of Seongnam in 2010 and was re-elected in 2014, serving 2 terms until 2018. As mayor, he cultivated an image as a progressive reformer with, populist leanings, implementing various welfare and transparency initiatives that gained national attention.
What did those initiatives look like on the ground? Something like a local basic income, perhaps?
Exactly. He introduced a youth dividend program, providing a stipend to young adults in local currency vouchers. The stated goals were to stimulate the local economy and support unemployed youth.
Okay.
The sources also highlight his aggressive management of city finances during this time, reportedly taking Seongnam from a significant debt burden to budget surpluses,
Really? Okay.
which then funded expanded social programs like free school uniforms and increased child care subsidies.
He even tackled issues like animal welfare as mayor.
He did. A notable move was shutting down Moran Market, which was the country's largest dog meat market. This was a controversial but widely lauded effort by animal rights activists, gaining significant international attention.
His style as mayor sounds like it was quite distinctive and maybe a bit confrontational.
Outspoken and hands-on is how the sources describe him. Definitely. He was known for his active presence on social media and his willingness to directly confront critics. During the large-scale protests against then-President Park Geun-hye in 2016-17, he gained national fame for being one of the most vocal politicians supporting the demonstrators. This direct, blunt style earned him the nickname Twitter Trump,
Twitter Trump.
which the sources note was often seen positively at the time by his supporters for its perceived authenticity.
Right. That visibility clearly boosted his profile and set the stage for his first national political bid.
Yes. Building on that momentum, in 2017, he entered the Democratic Party's presidential primary. He was initially seen as a bit of a dark horse candidate, but ran on a strong anti-corruption and pro-common people platform. He surprised many observers by finishing a strong third behind Moon Jae-in, firmly establishing himself as a rising star within the liberal camp.
So he leveraged that national profile from the primary into running for a major provincial leadership role.
Correct. In 2018, he successfully ran for governor of Gyeonggi Province, which, as you know, is South Korea's most populous province. His victory marked the first time a liberal governor had held the position in 16 years, a significant political shift.
And he continued implementing those expansive social policies he became known for in Seongnam, just on a larger scale.
Precisely. He rolled out what were seen as signature welfare programs at the provincial level, including a basic income allowance and initiatives aimed at providing basic housing. Mimicking his Seongjam program, Gyeonggi Province began distributing an annual stipend of around 1 million won to all 24-year-old residents, calling it a youth dividend.
Right, the youth dividend again.
And he also pushed for more affordable public housing options, specifically targeting young people and families.
His approach during the initial stages of the COVID-19 pandemic also garnered national attention, didn't it?
It did. He notably diverged from the central government's more targeted approach to disaster relief payments. Instead, he advocated for and provided universal disaster relief payments to every single resident of Gyeonggi Province.
Universal payments, okay.
Yeah, in 2021, emergency funds were directed to all 14 million residents of the province. His argument, according to the sources, was that universal support was the fairest approach because, well, all the people suffered together.
I see.
This policy proved quite popular, although critics, particularly from the rival Conservative Party, accused him of using provincial resources to strategically boost his profile ahead of a likely presidential run.
It sounds like clashing with the central government became a bit of a theme for him as governor.
It was, frequently. On issues ranging from pandemic policy coordination to large-scale development projects, he was often at odds with the central government. This dynamic further solidified his image among supporters as an anti-establishment figure willing to stand up for local interests and his policy vision.
Right.
By late 2021, this made him one of the ruling Democratic Party's most prominent and recognizable politicians.
Which directly led to his nomination for the highest office.
Yes. Citing his record of policy implementation and fiscal management in both Gyeonggi and Sonyum, he won the Democratic Party's nomination in 2021. He positioned himself as the party's standard-bearer for the 2022 presidential election, focusing his platform on reducing inequality through progressive economic policies, including proposals for a national basic income and comprehensive housing reforms. He also presented himself as a pragmatic problem solver and advocated for a moderate approach to North Korea and balanced diplomacy.
But the 2022 election wasn't just about policy platforms. The sources highlight that his opponent, Yoon Suk-yeol, heavily zeroed in on various ethical controversies surrounding Lee.
Absolutely. Those controversies, which we'll dig into in more detail shortly, became a major and often overshadowing focus of the campaign. Ultimately, the election was incredibly close, perhaps the closest in South Korean history.
How close?
Lee lost by a razor-thin margin, receiving 47.83% of the vote to Yoon Suk-yeol's 48.56%. It's a difference of only 0.73 percentage points. Just incredibly narrow, the narrowest margin ever in a Korean presidential race.
Wow. A bitter outcome after such a long climb. But he didn't step away from politics after that defeat.
Not at all. The sources indicate he quickly pivoted. Just months after the presidential loss, in June 2022, he successfully ran for and won a seat in the National Assembly.
Okay.
And then, remarkably, in August 2022, he was elected leader or chairman of the Democratic Party of Korea, the main opposition party.
That does seem like an unusual move for a recently defeated presidential candidate.
It was considered unusual, yeah. But the party's rank and file, according to the reports, saw him as their strongest figure and best hope to galvanize the opposition against the new Yoon administration.
Makes sense.
As DPK chairman and the de facto opposition leader, he used his platform to become a fierce and consistent critic of President Yoon's policies.
South Korean politics sounds like it became intensely confrontational in 2023.
It certainly did, and Lee was a central figure in those political battles. In August and September of 2023, he undertook a high-profile 24-day hunger strike.
A hunger strike?
Yes. This protest, according to his statements and the sources, was against what he described as the Yoon government's failures regarding economic hardship and perceived threats to democracy. It concluded with his hospitalization.
And around the same time as this political protest, he faced a major development in the legal challenges that have followed him.
Yes. Prosecutors who had been conducting multiple investigations involving him escalated the situation by filing a motion seeking his arrest on corruption charges.
Seeking his arrest while he's the opposition leader.
Exactly. And in what the sources describe as a dramatic turn, the National Assembly, where his party held a majority, actually voted to waive his immunity, essentially allowing for his potential arrest despite his status as a lawmaker. The reports note this vote surprisingly succeeded due to dissent from some members within his own party.
Wow, division even within his own party on that, but he ultimately wasn't arrested.
That's correct. An arrest warrant hearing was held by a court, and after reviewing the evidence, the court ultimately dismissed the warrant request. This meant he avoided pretrial detention, a major moment that was widely seen as one of the gravest tests of his political career to date.
And then, tragically, he also survived a physical attack relatively recently.
Yes, in January 2024, during a public event in Busan, a man posing as a supporter approached him and stabbed him in the neck.
Oh my God.
Lee was airlifted to a hospital in Seoul, underwent emergency surgery, and thankfully recovered from the near-fatal attack.
The assailant's motive, as reported, was quite stark.
Yes, the assailant confessed that his motive was to kill Lee, to prevent him from ever potentially becoming president in the future. This incident shocked the nation and, according to some reports, also garnered a degree of public sympathy for Lee.
So as of mid-2025, the sources indicate he remains a member of the National Assembly, holds the powerful position of leader of the main opposition Democratic Party, and is widely considered a potential candidate for the next presidential election.
Right.
Albeit with the crucial caveat that this potential future hangs significantly on the outcomes of multiple ongoing legal cases.
Exactly. And as we've touched upon throughout his career timeline, one of the most persistent and defining aspects of Lee Jae-myung's political life has been the sheer volume and seriousness of controversies and legal investigations surrounding him. The sources detail scrutiny ranging from alleged corruption and campaign misconduct to past personal matters. For you to understand his current standing and future prospects, it's essential we look closer at these key legal issues, laying out what the sources say are the allegations and Lee's responses, maintaining strict impartiality based only on the material we have.
Right, focusing just on presenting the different sides of the story as reported in the sources. No taking sides here.
Precisely. The most significant allegations, and the ones currently proceeding to trial, stem from large-scale real estate development projects that took place when he was the mayor of Seongnam.
These are commonly referred to as the Daejang-dong and Baekhyun-dong scandals.
Let's start with Daejang-dong. According to the sources, this was a city-backed development project from 2015. Prosecutors allege that a small private consortium involved in the project reaped enormous profits, reportedly over 800 billion won.
800 billion? That's huge.
It is, while the city's potential share of those profits was significantly curtailed. Prosecutors claim Lee colluded with these private developers to rig the project setup in their favor, allegedly causing a financial loss for Seonnam City of around 490 billion won. Several of Lee's close associates were arrested in connection with this.
Okay.
Lee was formally indicted in March 2023 on corruption and breach of duty charges related to this project. And just to clarify for you, being indicted means that, based on their investigation, prosecutors have formally charged him with a crime and are bringing the case to trial.
Got it. And Baekhyun-dong is related but a separate project.
That's right. There's another case from around 2015 involving land rezoned from a state-owned greenbelt site specifically for apartment development. Critics, according to the sources, claim this rezoning was a corrupt favor provided to developers.
And Lee's side?
Lee's position, as reported, is that the rezoning was done under pressure from the National Land Ministry. However, the sources note the prosecutors say they found no evidence to support Lee's explanation.
Right.
And court discussions mentioned in the reports have viewed the deal as suspicious. A sole court ruling in 2023 on a separate related matter concluded that Lee's claims of government coercion regarding Baekhyun-dong were false, as no such demands were documented. As of 2025, the Daejang-dong and Baekhyun-dong allegations are being tried together in an ongoing corruption trial where Lee is accused of providing unlawful favors to private investors.
And throughout these cases, what has been Lee's consistent position?
Lee consistently maintains his innocence. He characterizes these investigations and charges as politically motivated persecution aimed at harming him by the current administration.
Okay. Another case involves alleged dealings related to the city's football club, Seonnam FC.
Right, this is often called the Seonnam FC case. It centers on claims that businesses were improperly pressured to donate money to Seonnam FC, of which Lee, as mayor, was the de facto owner. Prosecutors allege these donations were made in exchange for favorable treatment from the city on municipal issues like zoning changes or building permits.
Ah, like a quid pro quo.
Exactly. The prosecution claims that between 2014 and 2016, Lee solicited roughly 17 to 18 billion, won from 4 different companies, in the form of donations or sponsorships for the club.
This sounds like the prosecution is framing it as a form of indirect or third-party bribery, where the benefit goes to the club but is allegedly given in exchange for a favor to the company.
That's precisely the prosecution's framing in the sources. They allege it was a quid pro quo arrangement. Lee's counter-argument, as reported, is that any corporate sponsorships for the football team were entirely legitimate, had no strings attached, and simply benefited the city and its citizens by boosting the local sports club.
But he was indicted anyway.
Nonetheless, yes, he was indicted for bribery related to these funds, and this case is being heard concurrently with the Daejang-dong charges. He was not detained pending trial in this case either. The sources highlight how politically charged this issue became, noting that in early 2023, the National Assembly initially protected him from arrest on these charges by voting down a warrant request.
Right, I remember you mentioning that vote earlier. Then there's a case involving alleged unauthorized payments to North Korea.
This is known as the Sangbang-wool case. Prosecutors allege that in 2019, when Lee was Gyeonggi governor, his administration sought to arrange a visit to North Korea. They claim a businessman was then pressured to send money to the North on Gyeonggi's behalf to facilitate this. A local underwear firm, Sangbang-wool Group, whose chairman reportedly had ties to Gyeonggi officials, is alleged to have transferred funds reported in sources as around $5 million to North Korean intermediaries. This was purportedly to facilitate a potential future visit by Lee or a joint project which ultimately never materialized.
And such a payment, if unauthorized, would violate sanctions and South Korean law, right?
Yes, exactly. According to the sources, this would violate South Korea's specific sanctions and laws prohibiting unauthorized cross-border payments to North Korea. Lee is accused by prosecutors of pressuring or colluding with this businessman to illicitly remit the money, which they frame as a form of bribery or breach of trust related to his official capacity as governor. This led to another indictment against Lee in 2023.
What has Lee said in his defense regarding these North Korea allegations?
Lee denies any knowledge of such payments. His defense, as reported, is that any contacts or discussions with North Korea during his governorship were handled through official channels, and he absolutely never asked or instructed a private company to make payments to Pyongyang on his or the province's behalf. This case is being heard separately at the Suwon District Court as of 2024, and, if proven, could indeed constitute a serious national security-related offense under South Korean law.
Wow. Beyond these, his campaign activities themselves seem to have resulted in charges under election law.
That's correct. In September 2022, he was indicted under the Public Official Election Act for allegedly making false statements during the run-up to the 2022 presidential election.
False statements about what?
The specific statements in question, according to the prosecution in the sources, related back to the very scandals we've just discussed. He had publicly claimed he was not involved in any wrongdoing in the Daejang-dong and Baekhyun-dong affairs, and also stated that he didn't personally know a key figure connected to those cases, Kim Moon-ki,
Right.
a Seonam development official who later died by suicide. Prosecutors argued these public claims were untrue and were intended to mislead voters.
And there was a recent court ruling on these specific false statement charges.
Yes. In October 2023, a Seoul court delivered a first-instance verdict, finding Lee guilty on parts of these charges. The court ruled he had indeed published false information regarding the Baekhyun-dong land deal and about the extent of his relationship with the late official, Kim Moon-ki.
So guilty. What was the sentence?
Based on this, he was sentenced to 1 year in prison, suspended for 2 years.
A suspended sentence means he wasn't immediately jailed, but what are the potential consequences if that verdict is upheld through the appeals process?
This is a crucial point highlighted in the sources. A suspended sentence is effectively a probationary sentence. If this verdict is upheld by higher courts on appeal, South Korean election law is quite strict. Even a fine exceeding 1 million won for violating election law can strip a politician of their elected seat and bar them from running for office for a set period, typically 5 years.
5 years, so this could end his career if upheld.
So yes, this particular charge, despite being related to campaign statements rather than direct corruption, poses a significant existential risk to his political future if the conviction is not overturned.
And he is currently appealing this conviction.
Yes, he is actively appealing the verdict, maintaining that he answered truthfully based on his understanding at the time and reiterating his claim that the charge is politically motivated. As of 2025, the case is pending at higher courts.
There's also a related charge involving alleged witness tampering.
Yes. This charge dates back to a 2019 trial where Lee was acquitted of an earlier election law accusation. Prosecutors now allege that Lee, around the time of that trial, persuaded an aide, a Seonnam city employee, to provide false testimony in court to help clear Lee's name.
False testimony about what?
The testimony in question reportedly concerned the 2002 incident where Lee impersonated a prosecutor. Remember that?
Ah, yes, early in his career.
Right. The aide testified that an old corruption case was a setup against Lee, which the sources suggest helped lead to Lee's acquittal on a technicality in that 2019 trial.
And what evidence is presented for this new charge of tampering?
In late 2022, prosecutors indicted Lee for suborning perjury, which means getting someone else to lie under oath. They reportedly presented recorded phone calls as evidence, which they claim show Lee coaching this witness on what to say. Lee denies ever pressuring anyone to lie, stating the witness simply recounted their honest recollection. That trial is also ongoing. If found guilty, he could face additional fines or imprisonment. He again asserts this charge is politically driven, pointing out that the original issue from 2002 had already been litigated and closed.
Beyond these major ongoing cases currently in court, the sources mention some past investigations and more personal scandals he has weathered throughout his career.
Yeah, his legal challenges certainly didn't begin with the current administration. In 2018, while campaigning for governor, he faced a significant accusation of abusing his power related to a family matter.
A family matter.
The specific allegation was that as Seonnam mayor in 2012, He improperly used his authority to attempt to have his estranged older brother forcibly institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital during a heated family dispute. Lee admitted there was a family altercation but denied any illegal coercion and was also accused of lying about the incident in a televised debate during the gubernatorial campaign.
And he was initially convicted on this. That sounds serious.
Yes, in 2019, a lower court convicted Lee for abuse of power and making false denials about the incident, issuing a fine of 3 million won. This was a serious outcome at the time, as it threatened to remove him from office as governor.
But that conviction was overturned.
Crucially, yes. In July 2020, the Supreme Court of Korea overturned his conviction. This decision effectively exonerated him regarding the abuse of power charge.
On what grounds?
The top court ruled that his debate remarks about the incident didn't constitute criminal falsehoods in context, emphasizing that punishing candidates for campaign statements should be done very cautiously. The Supreme Court ruling was pivotal. It allowed him to serve out his term as governor and significantly cleared a major obstacle for him to run for president in 2022.
I see. The sources also touch on some past personal controversies, like an alleged extramarital affair that surfaced during a campaign.
He vehemently denied that specific allegation, and it did not result in any criminal charges or findings. More recently, there was a controversy related to his wife, Kim Hee-young, and the alleged misuse of a Gyeonggi province corporate credit card while he was governor.
How did that case unfold based on the sources?
Well, prosecutors investigated claims that between 2018 and 2019, Lee's wife, reportedly with Lee's knowledge, used a government corporate credit card belonging to a provincial employee to pay for personal expenses, primarily meals.
So, public funds for private meals.
Essentially, yes, that's the allegation that public funds were used for private benefit. While relatively minor in scale compared to the development scandals, Lee was indicted in late 2024 for misuse of public funds in connection with this matter involving his wife's alleged spending.
And his response to this charge?
Lee publicly apologized for his wife's actions, but characterized the prosecution's decision to pursue the case against him as excessive. So, throughout this long list of controversies and legal challenges, Lee Jae-myung's consistent position, as reported, has been one of maintaining his innocence. He often highlights that he has not been definitively convicted of corruption charges, aside from that first instance verdict on false statements which he's currently appealing.
Right.
He also points to cases against him that have been cleared in court, such as that crucial 2020 Supreme Court acquittal regarding the alleged abuse of power and false statements about his brother.
And the sources note he has a strong and frequently stated claim about the underlying motivation behind many of these investigations, particularly the more recent ones.
Yes. Lee alleges that the conservative administration of President Yoon Suk-yeol, himself a former prosecutor, is deliberately weaponizing the judicial and prosecutorial processes as a political tactic, specifically to sideline or eliminate him as a political rival.
A claim echoed by his party.
Exactly. This claim is widely echoed and supported by his colleagues within the Democratic Party. The government and prosecutors, however, vehemently deny this, insisting that the investigations and charges are simply a matter of upholding the law and pursuing justice based on evidence, regardless of the individual's political status.
Wow, that is a tremendous amount of information to process. We've traced Lee Jae-myung's path from incredibly challenging working-class roots, overcoming significant hardship and disability, to becoming a prominent and powerful politician known for pushing progressive policies and serving as a fierce voice of the opposition. All of this unfolds while he navigates a constant and intense series of legal battles and political controversies. It's quite a story.
His story, as presented in these sources, is clearly a complex and dynamic mix of profound personal resilience, deep-seated advocacy for the disadvantaged, ambitious political maneuvering, and persistent, serious challenges in the form of legal allegation. The outcomes of the numerous ongoing trials are, without question, absolutely crucial, not just for Lee's personal fate and future political career, but they will inevitably have a profound impact on the shape and direction of South Korea's political landscape as the next election cycle approaches.
It really drives home how interconnected a politician's personal history, policy record, political strategy, and the legal system can become, especially at the highest levels of power.
Indeed. And it leaves us with an important question for you to consider as you reflect on this deep dive. How do you weigh a politician's policy record, their background marked by overcoming significant obstacles and advocating for reform, against the weight of numerous serious, unresolved legal allegations and the ongoing court processes,
Especially.
particularly in a context where claims of political motivation for those investigations are so prominent.
Something definitely worth thinking about as you process all this information. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.